We aim to revolutionize urban logistics in Lisbon with decentralized distribution sites and last mile delivery, meeting emissions targets and managing urban logistics growth while boosting efficiency and accelerating the transition to combustion-free delivery vehicles. In Portugal, at the moment, 25.8% of the emissions come from the transport sector. And since 1990, the emissions in the sector have been up 66%. And currently, environmentally unfriendly delivery vehicles drive directly to the customer to deliver their goods. As demand is increasing for goods, also is congestion and emissions. This raises the challenge how to manage urban logistics growth in the city center of Lisbon to be in line with emission cutting targets. Our solution is the proposal of three different policies. First of all, a ban on combustion delivery vans in the city center, an introduction of zero emission loading zones, and a subsidy to open decentralized distribution sites in the city center. We aim to reduce CO2 emissions by streamlining routes, optimizing traffic flow and reducing congestion, and facilitating transition to a combustion-free future. To achieve this, we require a task force of 8 experts which will develop and validate a proof of concept. The money required for this in the short term is around €96,000. This is based on the experts' daily rates and needed time. The minutes is about 3 months to develop the proof of concept, and then for the whole project to be finished, we estimate it to be done by 2027. Welcome to our presentation on the improvement of urban logistics in the city center of Lisbon. This is our international team of Rafael, Steiner, Valentina, Nicolas, and Mart, myself, who will be guiding you today through the value creation wheel and the project of urban logistics growth in Lisbon. We'll be tackling the following agenda points. First of all, we'll give you a diagnostic of the problem. Then we'll come up with ideas and criteria that are in line with the problem and help solve the problem. We'll select the ideas and filters and rank and weight the criteria. And then with the value creation funnel, we'll make sure that the best idea is selected in the end. And we propose the most value and create a prototype for further understanding. And then lastly, in phase 5, we'll show you the implementation and control that is needed to succeed in solving the problem of increasing emissions and also increasing demand for urban logistics. Now we'll hand it over to Valentina, who will guide you through the define stage.
So let's start with phase 1, where we'll define make a diagnostic, we will make the challenge, define a challenge, and we will end with defining the expected KPIs. Let's start with some key facts and numbers. The transport sector in emissions grew by 66% between 1990 and 2019, highlighting the need for change in urban logistics in Portuguese cities. About 25% of the total emissions comes from the transport sector. And the last mile delivery, about 53% of the total delivery cost, we can attribute this to the last mile delivery, resulting in emissions, demand for logistics, and costs that are increasing. We estimate also that there will be a huge increase in the amount of delivery vehicles, with 36% if we compare 2019 with 2030. Next to that, about 95% of the EU cities have a percentage of air pollution above the WHO standards, resulting in the quality of life for urban residents in the EU, including in Lisbon, is wavering. Next to these key facts that I just told you, there's also a huge pressure on city planning. And why is that? By 2050, the percentage of urbanization is projected to increase with 9% compared to 2015, resulting in 82% of urbanization. This asks for a need for change. Because about what I just told you, there's an increase in demand for delivery methods has caused an increase for emissions. The e-commerce and the decentralized local commerce generate additional pressure. Next to that, for the same turnover, there's a greater number of shipments and physical trips. And the city management can't reduce the demand without reducing its accessibility. City management only considers solutions for containment use of circulation and parking infrastructure. Let's now continue with our SWOT analysis. The Portuguese government has the power to initiate legislation to reduce emissions from logistics. Let's start with the strengths. They have the power to initiate legislation. They have also the access to a wide area of resources. They have also the ability to foster economic growth and development through the creation of a favorable business environment. And lastly, they have also the access to data and information, which is really important. On the other hand, we have also some weaknesses. The government can be slower to react due to the many decision-making steps. Next to that, the Portuguese government has the ability and the necessity to create coalitions in the decision-making. And they have also sometimes limited options due to the historical nature of Lisbon. Next to that, there's also a lack of cooperation among stakeholders to achieve sustainable economic growth. But we have also some other opportunities. The Portuguese government has the possibility to leverage economic growth through sustainable development. They can make use of technology and data to improve the efficiency of services and operation, and they can make there are already large investments by the EU into mobility. There's also a willingness of businesses and individuals to work towards achieving the sustainable goals. On the other hand of the opportunities, we have the threats. There can be a resistance from existing players in the logistics sector. Decentralized commerce increases urban movement due to door-to-door services, and there is a limited commitment from all parties due to other factors. And we have also a backlash from citizens who are hindered. So now, using the SWOT analysis, we performed also a TAUS analysis to derive potential actions to exploit opportunities and mitigate threats. So combining the opportunities and the strengths, we concluded that the initiation of public policies that can be backed by the EU investment funds. We can also there's also some interest from the major office, and we can also use the access to data information from universities in order to shape positive public policies. Next to that, we can tap into the motivation of businesses and individuals to work towards achieving sustainable goals together. Let's now combine the threats and the strengths. We can use the legislative power to mitigate backlash from private sector. Then we can work together with lobbyists in the logistical sector to find a suitable solution with widespread support. And we have the ability to incentivize citizens towards a more sustainable lifestyle. Then now we will combine the opportunities and the weaknesses. A greater amount of decision steps means that the final proposed legislation needs to be very refined. Further, the use of technology and data to begin elevating the problem of limited space in the city center of London. So we need to use the technology and data. Then we need to function as a central point for stakeholders in tackling the problem together. When we combine the weaknesses and the threats, we concluded that we can create funds to financially incentivize resistant players to cooperate or reduce with resistant tendencies. To reduce their resistant tendencies, we can create also policies that achieve the bare minimum in reducing emission while not limiting accessibility, and we can educate citizens to spark more awareness for the problems at hand over time. Conducted now the SWOT and the TAUS analysis, we will end up with our PESTEL analysis. So assessing the external environment enabled us to get a better understanding of the context and background of our challenge. First of all, let's go have a look at the political factor. The EU is investing heavily in sustainable urban mobility solutions, which can provide opportunities for funding and collaboration. Next to that, there's a pressure from interest groups and stakeholders to implement certain policies or make certain decisions, and the political tension between states can open conflicts. Lastly, we have also some trade agreements. Secondly, we have the economic factor. So there are a lot of fiscal and monetary policies about inflation, the interest rates for the environment, and the tax incentives. Like I already said, there's 25.8% of the emissions come from the transport sector, and there are limited exports. So the economic conditions such as recessions and or economic booms can impact the government's ability to fund programs and services. And we have the sociological factor. Demographics, population growth rate, and the lifestyle of citizens are of importance. Also, we need to have a look at the distribution of wealth, and the adoption of new technologies or the rise of certain social movements can also impact the government's operation and policies. Then there's a growing trend towards more environmental friendly lifestyle. Look at the use of alternative modes of transport, EVs, and so on. Now we will have a look at the technological factor. Under the technological factor, we have the research and develop activity and the pace of innovation. And the government may use the technology to enhance services and engage with citizens through online portals and social media. And we have also the access to emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and automation. Next to that, there's always, and this is a really important thing to recognize, that there's a thriving technology and startup sector in Portugal. Under the environmental umbrella, we can address environmental challenges such as climate change and natural disasters. We need to find a balance between the environmental concerns with other priorities, such as economic growth and development, and decisions relating to major wind energy projects, the management of the gas crises, programs to maintain or phase out nuclear power can also have a far-reaching impact. Then we have the legal factor, the EU legislation. There's already a lot of EU legislation to encourage all market players to limit their ecological damage. Then we have the European GDPR regulation concerning the protection of consumer data. And then we need to comply with legal frameworks and regulations such as the constitutional laws and international agreements. Next to that, you have the legal environment that can impact the government's ability to implement policies and programs. And we also need to address some legal issues like corruption and ethics in its operation and policies by making partnerships between businesses. So to end my part, it's important to state that Portugal incorporates the 2030 agenda into its national strategies, plans, and policies around the 5Ps. We will have a little look at the numbers that are indicated on the slide. So the rank of 20 out of 163 indicates that Portugal has made significant progress towards achieving the SDGs, but there is still some room for growth to grow and improve. Next to that, the country has an SDG index score of 79.2%, and this score can be interpreted as a percentage of the total SDG achievement, which indicates that Portugal is on the right track. The spillover effect is the extent to which a country's policies and actions affect other countries and the global communities in achieving the SDGs. A score of 69.1% suggests that Portugal's actions have positive spillovers effect, but there is still some room for improvement. For example, the Portuguese government could improve its efforts to promote sustainable production and the consumption of SDG, which is laid out in SDG Goal 12. When it comes to SDG Goal 9 and 11, there are still some major challenges to be addressed, but the government is on the right track of resolving them.
So, after evaluating the context as explained by Valentina and getting a good understanding of the landscape, we then started validating the challenge we were asked to solve and performed a 5 whys analysis. Thereby, the ultimate goal was to find the root cause of our problem. As already pitched by my colleague Mart, the definition of our challenge is how to manage urban logistics growth in the city center of Lisbon to be in line with emission cutting targets. We specifically wanted to come up with a solution that can be implemented in one neighborhood, in one of the many neighborhoods of the city of Lisbon, and if it is successful, also scaled to other parts within Lisbon or even to other parts within the country of Portugal. Now, to start with the first why, we asked ourselves, why do we actually have to reduce emissions in the city center of Lisbon? This question might be quite obvious, thinking about the reality about climate change and so on. Nevertheless, it was still important to us to get that as specific as possible, and I will explain in a minute how it will contribute to the emission targets set by the UN, the EU, and most importantly, by the Portuguese government. The following next 3 whys, so why 2, 3, and 4, are all interconnected to each prior one, with the aim of identifying the ultimate root cause of the problem, as I already said. And the main key takeaways here are the following. So the number of citizens is growing as well as their environmental awareness, and therefore this needs to be addressed to improve the quality of life and the overall attractivity of Lisbon. The current handling of urban logistics is not state of the art, and modes of transport emit too much greenhouse gases. And lastly, currently the space usage is not efficiently enough, which also causes severe traffic congestions. The last why then basically goes back to the first one of why we need to reduce emissions in Lisbon. And thereby we concluded the difficulty of fostering economic growth of Portugal, managing a growing number of citizens and tourists in Lisbon, while also prioritizing sustainable initiatives simultaneously. Now, that said, our ultimate goal was to come up with a solution that fosters sustainable measures, but at the same time also supports the economic growth of Portugal. After performing the first draft of the 5Y analysis, we then discussed it and adjusted it slightly with Pedro, our KDM, which was really important to us to make sure that we are all on the same page and have the same understanding. Moreover, as you can see on the slide before continuing, we also rechecked if we fulfill all the conditions of a challenge that gets solved by applying the VCW. Among the most important ones here, as you know, is that the challenge can be implemented by the KDM and that we can involve him in our development process. So moving on to the next slide, we then started working on the KPIs, which turned out to be somewhat difficult for us because measuring project output metrics like CO2 reductions, air quality, and traffic flow are long-term and can be quite ambiguous, meaning that not only our solution is contributing to that measure, but also other initiatives put in place by, for example, the private sector or other public authorities can have an impact on that. Now, that said, our goal was to meet KPIs within the category project team related, as for instance, to fully understand how to apply the VCW to the public sector and develop more knowledge around the topic of urban mobility. And also company output related, which is basically the overall satisfaction of Pedro, our KDM, and other involved stakeholders within our final proposed solution. In comparison to the project output related, those examples of project team and company output related, they are measurable and they are also achievable in the time period that we have available. Nevertheless, as soon as our proposed solution gets implemented, KPIs like CO2 emission reduction, efficiency gains, cost savings within logistics, and moving on to the next slide, also, for example, traffic reduction, air quality, and the number of EVs or alternative modes of transports need to be closely monitored and also prioritized in order to generate the highest possible impact. Moreover, our project should also have a wider impact on the progress of innovation around urban mobility and sustainable city development in Portugal, which then should, in the end, preferably increase the overall quality of life in Lisbon. All right, so taking the long-term KPIs now into consideration, and as I said, they were quite difficult to achieve within the time we had available, we agreed together with our KDM that our main goal is to contribute long-term to the broader objectives set in a 2050 carbon neutrality roadmap for Portugal, and hereby focus obviously on the decarbonizing of urban logistics. Now, as you maybe know, this roadmap is based on the Paris Agreement, which sets the average global temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius. And the roadmap for Portugal has been structured with a long-term vision around 3 interconnected axes, which include the valorization of territory and habitats, a more circular economy, and the decarbonization of society and also energy transition. Now, to be in line with these targets, Portugal needs to reduce gas emissions by more than 85% compared to 2005. One part, which is of high importance, is also the decarbonizing of urban mobility by, for example, exchanging public transport fleets, supporting innovative and sustainable mobility solutions, like we are doing right now with our project, and promoting a logistics chain with minimized carbon and energy intensity. Now, as I already mentioned, our challenge is focused on finding a solution specifically for the city center of Lisbon. That's because we had to understand which stakeholders we have to include in our process. So we first analyzed how the municipality of Lisbon is assembled. Important to highlight here is that the municipality is based on 24 parishes, which all have their own decision-making power for certain areas, meaning they can decide independently from the regional and the national government. So given that our project is within the public sector, we rank potential stakeholders then based on perceived relevance, power, and interest levels. On the stakeholder matrix on the right side, you can see clearly that the local council, the so-called parishes, the city, or also called municipality council, so Lisbon overall, the KDM, the suppliers and distributors, but also the local community are the most central stakeholders for our project. Nevertheless, it is really important to mention that leveraging knowledge at lower levels of power might help to converge interest level among more powerful stakeholders. Now, since Pedro, our KDM, is working within the National Bureau of Urban Mobility, we agreed with him that we'll mainly have interactions with him as he represents basically the government and involve required local authorities to validate our proposed solution. So in other words, in order to propose a relevant and suitable policy on urban mobility, we take into account all relevant stakeholders, but mainly engage at government level. Moving on to the next slide, we listed then all required stakeholders and allocated them to the relevant phases of the VCW. As you can see, most stakeholders should be engaged indirectly, meaning that they are taken into account, as I already said, while developing the solution, but not directly get contacted within our project period. Nevertheless, we planned to, where applicable, reach out to respective authorities or stakeholders, which we also did in the end. So, for example, we had a meeting or a workshop with the head of innovation at EML, which is the local authority for parking and mobility, to find out if we are really on the right track and also see what has already been done to make sure we don't replicate any initiatives. And that's it for phase one. I would like to hand it over to Steiner now.
Thank you, Rafael. Now we're going into phase two, increase. In phase two, we opened our minds and came up with ideas that we believe would contribute to solve the challenge that now has been defined. To do this, we met and emailed with our KDM as well as other stakeholders like ML. After gathering the data and increasing our knowledge about logistics in Lisbon, we first brainstormed individually before we brought the ideas to a team meeting where we used the brainwriting 365 method that we had learned from Professor Lodges. This was a very interesting and fun, I must say, process as we saw how many great ideas we could build and improve together using this structured methodology. We came up with a total of 34 ideas that we sorted into the categories of restrictive, incentivizing, and facilitating. As we do acknowledge that putting our ideas into categories at this stage already could create some kind of filtering, we were quite careful and made sure that we were very aware of this potential issue. But we saw it being useful, having these categories, for a very good and systematic approach and process while working with our ideas. Some of these ideas we knew from our own countries or we had read about doing our research, and others were fully constructed or evolved in our brainwriting process. Onto the ideas for incentive policies. Here we used the same process, gathered primary and secondary data from KDM stakeholders and also doing research online, finding good papers, looking through databases and links that were sent to us by KDM and his contact persons, and came up with some good ideas also for this category. For idea number 14, to go into that one, we divided it up in several subparts. And these parts in total constructs what we see as this idea as its optimal, and it's full optimal in our opinion. But the sub-ideas would also have great value, and it was therefore important for us to put it up like this, because we might end up at the point where we would remove some parts of the idea, but keep other parts of it. So this was a good solution to make sure that we wouldn't lose any valuable ideas in our work. Lastly, we have our ideas for facilitative policies. Here also the same process and methodology as for restrictive and incentivizing ideas. And
we came up with also quite a good bunch of good and interesting ideas, would say. So then over to potential filters and criteria. Also by using brainstorming, brainwriting, and also through then secondary research, we wrote down 28 filters that we thought could be useful in creating a good and feasible idea to solve our challenge. As our case is not a classic business case, we found it somewhat challenging to come up with quantitative filters because there will always be a lot of projects that will contribute to the cut of CO2 emissions in a city as big as Lisbon, and it's therefore challenging to isolate and measure the effect of our idea. However, we believe that we came up with 28 interesting filters that would be valuable to bring with us further into our project. Now we're going to phase 3, where we assess and select ideas and criteria, as well as rank and weight the criteria. We had a great meeting with our KDM, and here we went through our ideas and purified them to make sure that they would be brought, would and should be brought further into the process, to make sure that they were absolutely clear. This took us from 13 to 9 ideas in the category of with ideas for restrictive policies. Some ideas changed category, and so it was moved to either facilitative policies or incentivizing policies, and some ideas was completely removed and taken out. As we saw in discussion with KDM that they were not fitting for our project. The category of incentive ideas also shrunk, as KDM could inform us that some of our ideas in this category was actually in process to be implemented right now, which was, of course, we just saw as a very positive thing, as this was ideas that we saw could be useful, and yes, Lisbon is already implementing them, which is a step in the right direction. Same counts for ideas for facilitative policies. The ideas were purified and some were removed to make sure that the ones left was clear and good. Then we applied the PERC method to go through our filters together with KDM. This was an effective and useful process where we realized that a good bench of our filters was not very important for KDM, but we also kept a fair amount of them, and the KDM was very satisfied with the process. So we realized that some of our filters that we initially thought could be important and useful really just should be removed, because of course each government in different countries have different ways of working, and they have also different influences on the local municipalities. And we realized that the Lisbon municipality has a lot of freedom, and therefore some of these filters would really not be applicable in a case here in Portugal. Some of them we had to review and to improve. But yes, as mentioned, and as you can see here, we still kept a good amount of filters that we took on with us to the next step, which was to give weight and priority to our different criteria, or then also named called filters. The top weight was 1, and of course the filter implementable by KDM got this weight, as the project would stop if the idea wouldn't be implementable by him. Some other filters was also important, but it was necessary to give them a lower weight to ensure that we were left with the filters that provided us the most useful and feasible ideas. We also put some of the criteria, the filters, on nice to have. For example, scalability. As of course it would be very nice if the idea we would end up with could be used in other cities in Lisbon or even other countries, but we also have to recognize that each of these cities, or that Lisbon is a unique city. It has its geographic outlay, it has its streets, it has its traditions, restrictions, whatever. So we have to recognize that the cities are different in a country, and also, of course, if we looking at other countries. So therefore, it's more important that the idea that works in Lisbon, which is the city that we are working on. Therefore, we put this one as a nice to have, and the other ones as need to have. Now I'm handing over to Mark that will take us through phase 4.
Thank you, Steiner, for explaining the weighted criteria and the purified ideas. Now we can move on to phase 4, which is the narrow phase, in which we'll look at the value creation funnel, our concept and value proposition, and our prototype, which is important in the end to have an idea and an understanding of how we'll solve the challenge. So first of all, we look at the VCF, the value creation funnel, and the multi-criteria decision analysis. The VCF is a method in which the ideas are ranked on a scale from 1 to 5 in our case on the likelihood of passing a certain criteria. So, for example, for the ideas presented on the left, they all passed the 5 different criteria at least 3 out of 5. So, ban of combustion delivery vans in the city center was assessed by the KDM to be implementable at a level 3 out of 5. Then there was also one idea which passed all the VCF criteria at a threshold 4, meaning that it was implementable by the KDM 4 out of 5, impact on CO2 emissions was evident 4 out of 5, and so on. Then also we used a multi-criteria decision analysis to implement the weights that were considered by the KDM. So the implementable by KDM criteria was weighted higher than others. And in the end, that created the weighted attractiveness score. So the introduction of zero emission loading zones has a 17.1, which is a high attractiveness score, while urban gardening and shortening supply chains only has a score of 10.3 and therefore is not so attractive in solving our problem. With that, there were also 7 ideas which we identified but are not applicable today. And those can be backlogged for possible later projects pursued by the government. Such projects are a congestion charge for driving during peak hours or autonomous vehicles for night delivery using AI. Now back to the ideas that we can use in solving our challenge. Using the weighted shortest job first method, we find the ideas that will help us create value as soon as possible. The WSJF method looks at 3 different criteria: the citizens' business value, and looking at what is the relative value to citizens or businesses of this idea. Time criticality, are we needed for the idea to be completed, and how necessary is it to complete the idea soon? And the impact on CO2 evident, does the idea impact our desired goal of reducing CO2 emissions while managing urban logistics growth? Looking at the analysis, we see that all those 3 criteria are added up to one score, which is the cost of delay. This is the cost of how bad it would be not to do the idea now, but at a later stage. And then we also have a score for job size, how big of a commitment or big of an investment it would be, or how hard it would be to implement the idea at this stage. Dividing the cost of delay by the job size creates the WSJF score. With this score, we find a relatively easy project to do, and which will have also the biggest impact, relatively spoken. So according to the VCF, introducing zero emission loading zones might be a good idea to do. According to the WSJF, the ban of combustion delivery vehicles scores high, but also opening of distribution sites in the city can be an attractive idea to pursue. So together with the KDM, we actually selected all of these 3 ideas to consider for the final solution. So the ban of combustion delivery vans in the city center, an introduction of zero emissions loading zones specific to green vehicles, and a subsidy to open distribution sites in the city. With that, we look towards the concept and the value proposition. The concept of our idea is to combine the ideas to achieve the biggest impact. We start with the ban on combustion delivery vans in the city. We incentivize with the introduction of zero emission loading zones and incentivize with a subsidy to open decentralized distribution sites. Altogether, we hope that this accelerates the transition to a greener future of the city center of Lisbon. We combine these ideas because we think it's not desirable to only do the ban at this moment, as this would create a shock to the system and would not allow the customers and businesses to adjust properly to the new situation, compromising economic and social value at this time. However, in the longer run, the value proposition of combining the three ideas is that we manage urban logistics growth and we will cut CO2 emissions. And this is working towards the overarching objective of contributing to the 2050 carbon neutrality roadmap for Portugal, which was based on the Paris Agreement. So the impact achieved by implementing our solution is a reduction of CO2 emissions by streamlining routes, optimizing traffic flow and reduced congestions, and facilitating transition to a combustion-free future. To show how these three ideas can be worked out to create a functioning pilot project and how it can work in real life, we look at best practices of other cities and see how these can work for Lisbon. First of all, for the ban on combustion delivery vehicles, as I mentioned before, a full ban would not be wise to pursue at this stage. Rather, we would ban from 2027 onwards, which would allow for a transition period. In this transition period, for example, from 2024 onwards, there would be an incremental introduction of time-based restrictions on the most polluting vehicles. So, for example, large trucks couldn't enter from noon until 6 in a particular area. Then we can enforce these time-based restrictions and in the end the ban by placing cameras at area entry points. These cameras read the license plates and are combined with a network and a database which registers if a certain vehicle can enter or not enter based on the data available, if it is a combustion vehicle or is it a green vehicle. If the vehicle cannot enter, there will be a warning sent to the owner of the vehicle saying that they violated the area which they could not enter, and after a certain period of time these warnings would change over to fines, and this will allow for a smooth transition but also proper enforcement in the end, and this has been done successfully in Brussels, for example. Then to make sure everyone is on the same page, clear communication campaigns are necessary for businesses and customers to adjust over time to the new situation. Then the introduction of zero emission loading zones will help the efficiency of both delivery routing and will create a more attractive streetscape. How can we make sure that this works in Lisbon? First of all, AML owns the parking spaces on the street in Lisbon, and we would subsidize AML to convert those parking spaces or some of those parking spaces into zero emission loading zones, which are targeted at urban logistics. Then together with AML and businesses, we can leverage their knowledge to make sure that the right parking spaces and right areas are selected to ensure optimal delivery routing and ensure the efficiency of the project. There's also a possibility to expand on this, and this is to subsidize local startups which can provide sensors in the unloading zones, which would show in an app if the unloading zone is in use or not. And correspondingly, the app would suggest a delivery driver with the most efficient route. So if a delivery zone is in use, then the route would divert from that delivery zone and to close one, making sure that there's less congestion and the delivery driver can complete their route faster. Also, we can use different sizes of delivery zones. Smaller zones will stimulate the usage of green and small last mile delivery vehicles. Then the subsidy to open decentralized distribution centers in the city center, or DDCs, are a means with which the government can stimulate decentralized distribution. We would want this because, for example, in Paris, there has already been a reduction of 59% in the logistics area, which is attributable to more efficient logistics and green vehicles achieved by having DDCs in the city center. How can we do this in Portugal and in Lisbon? Is again to work together with AML and converting government-owned parking garages or empty buildings to DDCs and rent these out at an attractive price. Sizes required for these DDCs are about 600 to 1,000 square meters, which is available in parking garages. And in those spaces, we would select small logistics firms which can exploit DDCs at an attractive price. And with that, they can stimulate competition, which would engage the incumbents to adjust to decentralized distribution as well. Then we would reserve money for capital investment for all logistics firms to be used to make investments into decentralized distribution. And lastly, also reduce taxes on green last mile delivery vehicles, which would further incentivize the usage of more sustainable urban logistics solutions. Putting all this together, we find our prototype, which is here. Goods are entered into the city system via the airport, the harbor, or over land with trucks, and are put into the main facility. From there, usually the delivery vans with combustion engines, they drive directly to the private residences. But our proposal makes sure that these delivery vans, they drive first in a easy route to the decentralized distribution centers, as these are meticulously located and easily reachable for both last mile delivery vehicles and delivery vans. And in the decentralized distribution centers, the packages can be resorted and be sorted into the last mile delivery vans, which drive then to the private residence, at which they can park in the unloading zones, which are created in collaboration with EMAL, making sure that the whole system is more efficient and more green. In the city center, there will be less congestion, and also on the road from the main facility to the decentralized distribution, it will be an efficient route using highways and big roads. So we make sure that congestion is limited and the whole system is more effective, and therefore we reduce CO2 emissions. Then to make sure that this project as a whole works, we would like to propose a pilot project in a certain area. We selected a few key criteria which help select a suitable location. For example, demographic data is important, the availability of unloading zones, and the accessibility for last mile delivery vehicles. We considered 4 different areas in the city center of Lisbon, which were Arroios, Baixo, Marquês de Pombal, and Alfama. And our preliminary selection is to have a pilot project in Arroios, as there are bike lanes here, space for both DDCs and unloading zones, and there's a significant demand for deliveries. And also during high congestion, there's high congestion during peak hours. So having this project here would enable us to verify whether or not the project is viable and can be implemented in the rest of Lisbon and in the rest of Portugal for that matter. So now we move on to Nicolas, who is going to tell you more about how the implementation and the act phase will work for this project.
Thank you, Mart, for the detailed explanation about phase 4. Moving on to the last phase of the VCW, we will start looking at the 3 M's, starting with the manpower. Validating the prototype solution for the project will require a task force of 8 members that have unique roles with work streams and responsibilities. First, we have our KDM, who will oversee the project and its management. He will set and communicate project KPIs and ensure that these KPIs are achieved as desired. Next, we have the Director of Innovation, Mobility and Solutions at EMAL, who will facilitate the development of unloading zones and DDCs. She will also enable the conversion of existing EMAL property to loading zones and DDCs. A commercial real estate specialist will be responsible for DDC location selection and operationalization. The expert will evaluate properties for suitable as DDCs and arrange for their acquisition or transition. The strategy consultants will be responsible for conducting economic analysis, evaluating the viability and business relevance of the project. A sustainability expert will be tasked with the impact calculation of the concept, quantifying whether the project can achieve the desired environmental effect. We also have a GIS analyst and a logistical routing expert who will evaluate optimal routings and DDC location selection. They will justify location of DDCs through thorough geographical analysis. And lastly, we have civil servants from the municipality who will enable the execution of the project within the working of the local government. They will ensure the feasibility of the project by eliminating bureaucratic concerns. After establishing the task force for our project, we conducted a comprehensive scenario analysis to estimate the duration required for the development of a proof of concept. Our assessment encompassed the before mentioned force members, and after careful evaluation of the project's parameters, we arrived at the base timeline of 90 days to develop a proof of concept. This duration accounts for the multifaceted considerations that our team of experts will need to address to ensure the successful creation of a workable model. By conducting such a thorough analysis, we can mitigate any potential setbacks and advance the development process while maintaining the quality and efficacy of the project. Ultimately, this approach positions our team to achieve the desired outcomes in a timely and effective manner. In consideration of our scenario analysis, our team has proposed the following cost ranges for our project's monetary aspects. After carefully assessing the task force members' daily rates, we have approximated the development cost of a proof of concept to be around 96,000 euros. It is imperative to note, however, that this estimation is subject to fluctuations, and as such, we project a cost range of 74,000 euros to around 120,000 euros. Our team recognizes the significance of accurate financial estimations in any project, and we have executed our due diligence in our projections. Nonetheless, we remain mindful of the variables that may affect the cost and have taken a pragmatic approach in our cost estimates to allow for flexibility in our budget. Our team has crafted a time schedule for the three proposed ideas, considering a range of factors such as policy changes, government subsidies, and the phased introduction of greener urban logistics. Our focus has been on the zero-emission unloading zones and DDCs, and we have identified mid-2023 as a suitable starting point for these initiatives. As government subsidies are introduced, we anticipate that local government can gradually introduce more restrictive policies, facilitating the transition towards a greener urban logistics. By early 2027, we project that the successful transition to this new paradigm will result in most subsidies being stopped. As part of the transitional process, our team has developed a plan for the phased implementation of the final unloading zones, with the expectation that by the first quarter of 2027, a ban on all combustion delivery trucks will be both practical and feasible. As we move forward with this project, it is important to reflect on the KPIs that have been achieved thus far. Our team is pleased to report that we have made significant progress in both the project team-related short-term KPIs and the company outcome-related short-term KPIs. Regarding the project team-related KPIs, our team has successfully implemented an efficient workflow that leverages the VCW framework. This helped us to enhance the team's overall efficiency and productivity. Moreover, our team has gained valuable insights into the challenges associated with urban logistics in large cities like Lisbon. These insights have informed our approach to the project and have been invaluable in helping us to develop innovative solutions to these challenges. In terms of the company outcome-related short-term KPIs, we were pleased to report that our efforts have been well received by our KDM. We have worked closely with the KDM to ensure that our solutions are tailored to the needs and aligned with the objectives. Moving forward, we remain committed to iterating on our solutions to ensure that the project is executed successfully and that we continue to meet the KDM's expectations. In terms of the project output related KPIs, we have made some progress towards our goal of providing a substantial number of ideas for further exploration. It is worth noting that the city has already implemented several initiatives in this area, which necessitated our team to think creatively and propose innovative solutions. Despite this challenge, we are proud that 3 of our ideas have been accepted and are currently being evaluated for potential implementation. When it comes to the project output-related short-term KPIs, it is worth noting that evaluation of these metrics is not yet applicable since the pilot project has yet to be executed. However, based on benchmarks from similar initiatives, we are confident that our proposed solutions have the potential to yield significant cost savings and reductions in CO2 emissions. As such, we remain optimistic about the potential impact of our ideas and are eager to assess the effectiveness once the pilot project is underway. With regard to the project output-related long-term KPIs, it is important to highlight that due to the pilot project not yet being executed, evaluation of these metrics is currently not feasible. Furthermore, it is a complex task to isolate specific KPIs, such as air quality and health statistics, as there may be other factors that could potentially influence the outcome. As such, we recognize the challenge in evaluating the long-term impact of our proposed solutions. The realization of the 3 urban logistic concepts proposed is a complex undertaking that necessitates close collaboration with various stakeholders. To ensure the project's triumph, several significant milestones must be met. Primarily, the KDM assumes the role of leading the initiative by collaborating with the assigned task force members. The KDM will be responsible for defining the project boundaries, outlining KPIs, and establishing realistic deadlines, milestones, and financial targets. Secondly, a thorough and comprehensive feasibility analysis must be conducted to provide a sound basis for subsequent activities. Prior to initiating any subsidization, it is imperative to attain the key milestones of identifying optimal locations for the DDCs and unloading zones, which will greatly amplify the positive impact of the project. Additionally, the KDM and civil servants must work in tandem to ensure that all the financial planning is well coordinated and feasible. These crucial milestones must be accomplished in advance to initiate any subsidization. For the successful execution of the project, it is crucial to establish a cohesive and collaborative team, a clear project plan, and a monitoring and evaluation system. The team members should work together seamlessly, fully comprehending their respective roles and communicating transparently to achieve project objectives. To assess and address any issues that may arise during the project, a comprehensive evaluation system covering the 3 M's should be implemented. Progress reports should be compiled to keep stakeholders informed of the project status and address any concerns promptly. Furthermore, it is crucial to continuously monitor the project's progress to control for any deviations from the established goals. To better track project progress and identify potential issues, project management tools such as the Gantt chart should be employed. By adopting these measures, the project team will have a better overview of the project's progress and can make informed decisions. As we reflect on our experience, we can confidently say that the VCW framework provided a unique and effective approach to tackle the challenge of urban logistics in Lisbon. The project's complexity, which was heavily influenced by regulations and policies, required a creative application of the VCW, resulting in the generation of innovative ideas. Although some frameworks included in the VCW, such as the business model canvas, were not directly applicable, the VCW's flexible nature enabled us to modify certain phases to enhance the project outcomes. Working closely with our KDM allowed us to streamline the process and capitalize on each team member's diverse skills and backgrounds. Overall, the VCW served as a valuable tool in developing a feasible and impactful project that addressed the needs of our stakeholders. The experience of applying the VCW framework in a real-world problem context has been intellectually stimulating, and the resulting implementable solution is an achievement to be proud of. Thank you very much for your attention, and special thanks to Pedro and all the stakeholders for the great support during our project.